Welcome everybody that's here and everybody that's online. This is our second last seminar of the year, I believe, right? Today we have our PhD panel. We should have already had an MSc panel, MSc Epi panel, and a MPH panel. So we'll follow a similar format. But before we start, I just want to recognize and acknowledge that Queens is situated on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee people. And that the main goal of our, if you will, the main outcomes of our seminar today are for you to learn a little bit about some of our PhD alumni, to see some of the career options that you might have as students in public health sciences, maybe make a personal connection. You can ask Paul how to get a job, where he works, right? Those sorts of things. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce our four panelists for today. They weren't selected purely at random. We actually had a little bit of a systematic approach to select them, to get people from different years and to get people that went into different types of jobs after they left Queens. Okay, so immediate to my left here is Paul Boonmat. Hi, Paul. Paul graduated in 2022. His supervisor was Heather Stewart. His research when he was here looked at ethnocultural identity clarity and its association with mental health and mental health stigma. Paul now works at the analysis group in Montreal, and one of our more recent PhD graduates also works at the same place that Paul is. Directly to Paul's left is Brooke Linden. She graduated in 2019. Heather was also her supervisor. Brooke's research while she was a PhD student looked at development of tools to measure stress in university students. I believe some of these are actually used in the Queens, these tools are still used in the Queens Health surveys that you may have been involved in as a participant. Brooke is currently an adjunct assistant professor in public health sciences, Department of Biomedical and Molecular Sciences and Rehabilitation Sciences at Queen's University, as well as a research scientist at the Health Services and Research Policy Institute. So she wears lots of different hats, as you can tell. On our screen, you can see Kim Foley and Jennifer Rotanja. And Kim Foley, Kim is a graduate of our program in 2018. Her supervisors were Bill McKillop and Patty Groom, who have both recently retired. So they're no longer here. Kim's thesis looked at measuring the quality of personal care in prostate cancer radiotherapy. She's currently a research associate at the Department of Primary Care and Public Health at Imperial College in London. And finally, last but not least, is Jennifer Rotanja, who graduated in 2021, also did her MSc in our department. Her supervisors were Dr. Kristen Aronson and Joan Trammer. Joan is in the Department of Nursing. Her thesis work looked at night shift work, melatonin, and circadian rhythms and their implications for breast cancer. And she's currently a postdoctoral fellow at the Chum Research Center at the University of Montreal. And apparently there's a nice little group of PhD alumni, Paul was telling me, in Montreal, that if you end up moving there, that you could join. So I'm going to now turn the mic over, or pass the mic around to the people that are here first, and then we'll go to the people that are online to tell us, to first briefly introduce yourself, describe what your current job role is, including where your organization fits in the public health system. So Paul, it's International Women's Day, so I'm going to start with Brooke.
Perfect. Yep.
So hi, I'm Brooke Linden, as he said. So I'm a research scientist primarily. That's sort of my main hat that I wear at the Health Services and Policy Research Institute, which is just in Advanced Hall over, kind of sandwiched between UMed and BioSci buildings. Oh, hey, Mary. Mary's one of my TAs for one of my labs. I also, as you mentioned, teach in a few different departments, but primarily I teach research methods, so it's nice and sort of transferable across different departments, which is sort of how I ended up with three departments. So my role as a research scientist in history is very nice because it's very flexible. So a lot of the work that I've done since graduating has sort of taken my PhD research, which is the development of the post-secondary student stressors index, and sort of taken the opportunity to further that. I did also continue my postdoc fellowship with Dr. Stewart at history. And during that time, which also happened to coincide with the pandemic, during which I also had a baby. So there's kind of like a black hole in those 2 years of my life. But during that time, we were able to actually launch the tool nationally across Canada at 15 different post-secondary institutions. So lots of variation in the students that participated. And so since then, I've been able to, moving into the research scientist role, have, be able to take advantage of some of the resources at history and move my work farther into looking at not only post-secondary students, which is my sort of primary area of expertise, but also looking into key transition periods sort of in and out of post-secondary settings. So moving from high schools into post-secondary and then out of post-secondary into the workforce. And working with history has been wonderful because it gives us the opportunity to partner with a lot of organizations that have sort of footholds in those transition periods already. We do a lot of work with Canada Life, Workplace Strategies for Mental Health. They do a lot of work in workplace mental health and providing resources to employers to help sort of promote their workers' or employees' mental health. And then Bella's talk sort of on the other end of the spectrum, Bella's talk in Kids Helpful, working towards sort of like youth into emergent adulthood, moving from adolescence into secondary, high school into secondary.
Yep. So, so my name is Paul, just so you know how you introduced me. I started a PhD in 2017. I think before that, I did my master's in the States. And even before that, in my previous life, I went to med school and got an MD degree from Hagen. Towards the last year of my PhD, I was looking around, for different jobs, and then landed the gig that I am in today. So I work with a company called Analysis Group. It is a consulting firm. So what it means by consulting is that we don't, we're part of industry, but we work mostly with pharmaceutical companies. So basically, they have their own research questions that they want answered, but they want other people to do it for them. So they come to us, and then, we provide, different services and consulting services. Anything from writing proposals or protocols, doing analyses, writing manuscripts, or, making, posters for different topics. So in a nutshell, it's like I do 5 PhDs all at once, every time, and I don't get to choose the topic. Topics come to us, and then we just sort of have to make it work with whatever tools and resources that we have. I don't remember the question. Is it about just basically okay, yeah, so this is a public health asset. So basically that. Imagine, if a pharma company, they have, different drugs that they want to sort of launch. They sometimes, they come to us, and then we sort of, be part of the change that make it, available to the public, and do research for that, basically. Great.
Kim, do you want to go next, please?
Great, sure. Hi, everyone. I can't really see how many people are in the room, but it's great to be back, even though I'm coming in virtually. So I'm Kim. I am currently living in London, England. So I'm a postdoctoral research associate at Imperial College London. So I'm in the Department of Primary Care and Public Health, which is a very multidisciplinary group. Reminds me a lot of my days spent at CCE in the Queen's Cancer Research Institute in Kingston, because we're a very multidisciplinary group. We've got clinicians, we've got researchers, we've got statisticians, we've got a whole bunch of different people that kind of get the opportunity to work together. So I wear 2 different hats in the department. In one role, I'm part of the child health unit. So we do research primarily on child and adolescent health. And that would be sort of traditional academic research. I'm also part of the child population health theme for what we call ARC Northwest London. So it's the applied research collaboration for Northwest London. And this is one of 15, I believe it's 15 organizations that are funded through the National Institute of Health Research. And we're funded to do applied health and social care research. So people do a lot of academic research and work very closely with clinicians. So in terms of where the organization fits within public health, Imperial College London, you may have heard of before. It's a rather large research intensive university research college in the United Kingdom. So a lot of work there connects quite directly with public health. I'll probably stop there because I know I'll have more chances to talk later.
Thanks, Jen.
Hi, everybody. So I'm Jen. As I mentioned, I finished my PhD in 2021, and now I'm currently a postdoctoral fellow at CRCHM. So it's the University of Montreal Hospital Research Center. And additionally, I am affiliated with the University of Montreal as well. So currently, as I said, I'm a postdoctoral fellow. I'm working with Dr. Anita Kushik, who's actually also an alumni of the Queen's Master's Program. And my work right now differs a little bit than from what I did within my PhD. I'm using life course epidemiology methods to examine how different exposures such as vitamin D, obesity, and physical activity relate to ovarian cancer risk. So this, I guess, organization fits a little bit more easily into something that you might be familiar with. So it is within University of Montreal, but the Hospital Research Center is also its own, I guess, entity, even though it is associated. And my role ends up being very similar, maybe you could say, to what you might have seen in a PhD or even a little bit to master's. So I do spend most of my days conducting research, doing data analysis, writing manuscripts, but it's in a little bit of a different framework where you have a more control over, what you're doing and some of the ideas that you're having, but you're also additionally taking opportunities such as grant writing and things like that to really help propel yourself into maybe an academic track.
Great. Okay, so my 50% of my job is in kinesiology and health studies, and I tell my colleagues in kinesiology and health studies that my students, they complain that their students have a hard time getting jobs when they're done, particularly in the field at which they study. And I say I have a different complaint. Most of my students get jobs before they're done. So my problem is getting them to finish before they leave for their jobs, or if they leave for their jobs, getting them to work part-time on their thesis and finish it up in a reasonable time frame. So that's the lead into my next question, because I want our panelists to think back, not necessarily to when you're done your PhD, because with the PhD you're planning many months, if not years before you're done the PhD, about what your job's going to be or what it might be and what you need to apply to and things like that. So I want you to think back to those last maybe year or two or 6 months of your PhD as it was about to finish. And you're thinking about, what am I going to do after the fact? So sort of what were your steps in terms of thinking about jobs, looking for jobs, obtaining your position? And this time I'm going to start with Kim. We'll go in a bit of a different order.
Sure. So for me, it just kind of fit into a broader plan. I mean, I think for a lot of us, when we get to the PhD stage, it's a lot different than when you're in your undergraduate. Life has happened around you and life has moved on. So as part of sort of the broader context of my life, my husband had got a position as a lecturer, which is basically the equivalent to assistant professor at University College London. So we were moving to London. So then when I was finishing off my PhD, I was starting to work in this department, in the Department of Primary Care and Public Health at Imperial. And so I was just sort of working as a research assistant, but I knew that I was already making some connections in the department. I was really interested in some of the work that was happening, and I could see that it would be a really good fit for me. So I sort of worked to try and find a position that I could apply for in that department. So that might not be sort of the best answer, but but that's sort of how it worked out for me.
There's no such thing as the best answer. This is the answer that I think we're just trying to get different people's experiences and approaches. So Jen, do you want to share yours?
For sure. So I think what happens commonly for at least looking for postdocs is you're usually starting before you finish your PhD. So you want to start, usually thinking about who you want to work with, but also more importantly, what you see yourself doing. So your postdoc should really be a reflection of what you want your career, I guess, if you're going within the academic track. So it was a few months before I think I was graduating. I'm trying to remember. It was probably around February, actually around this time, that I was talking with my supervisor, Kristen, at the time, and we were, trying to figure out what my next steps might be. And then she had heard through Anita Kushik that she was looking for a postdoc. Had just gotten a grant funded and was looking for a postdoc. And so that, from what I understand, is typically sometimes how postdoc positions come up. It might be, you hear it through the grapevine. Sometimes there is a more formal process where you might see an ad come up online or through your email. But this was more of a word of mouth, and then went through a little bit of an interview process, and then the position was mine.
I applied for my postdoc 2 years before I started it. It's 2 years. I went there, I had an interview, and then we had to get the funding in place. It was a long process.
I'll just go next then. It was very scary for me. As an international student, I thought, at the time I got my permanent resident for those who were non-Canadian. Because you had to sort of navigate through the immigration system and also the job that you're sort of looking at, right? So last year was here. And to add a little bit of, another background context is that, my partner is Quebecois, so he's from Quebec City and, doing a PhD in neuroscience at McGill, so in Montreal. I know that our PhD would probably, in Canada, would be, in and around Montreal or Quebec City. I don't speak French, but I want to be with my partner. We never really lived together until the pandemic, when I got to be away from Kingston and be there. So I was looking for different options. Obviously a postdoc was the more, I guess, more common route for a PhD. So I talked to Heather and, looking at different options. One day there was an email from Sue. There was a forwarded email about, this job with analysis group in Montreal. This doesn't require French. They're looking for health economic outcome research associate, which is, a middle sort of position, like the people working with you who are, sort of positionally under you, and then you work with managers and stuff like that. So I looked at that, I looked at Fred and I'd be like, maybe this is it. Like, this is the opportunity for us to be together physically. Because, we got married, but we were still apart. So I applied, and then, within a month, I went through 2 rounds of interview, and then they made an offer. And then I, negotiated the start date. A few months later, I finished PhD, took a few months off, and then I started in May of 2022. Yeah. So it was very, very luck and chance based, not really a strategic thing that I had planned in mind.
I think it's also pay attention to the emails that the program that helpers send you, because they actually do contain this sort of information. So don't just automatically delete them. They are sending, they're actually vetted. Those types of job ads that are sent to you, they're not just, it comes in and Sue forwards it to everybody. She actually looks at it, often will ask Heather or myself or somebody else, should I forward this to the students? So those are job applications that we think that you would be qualified for, and that would be suitable given your background and training that you received at Public Health Sciences Academics.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I had sort of a bit of my story is a bit similar to Jen's, in that I did a postdoc immediately following my PhD as well. But backing up a little bit, I was actually the first student to go through the mini master's route in the department. So with Dylan was the second. Anybody else still knows Dylan is currently, I believe, still a postdoc out in Alberta. So we went through that program, but my experience was a little bit different because I had already achieved a master's degree from the University of Regina, Saskatchewan, but it's a Master of Arts in Sociology. That's what my initial background is, actually in social sciences. And I sort of always knew I wanted to go the academic route. But when I finished my MA, I thought, what if I don't though? Like, what if I finish a PhD in sociology and then I realize, oh, I actually don't want to work in academia. What are my options? And I, not that there wouldn't have been options, but I felt like because my work had gravitated towards sort of the sociology of mental health and mental illness, I felt like I might give myself a better chance in terms of job opportunities once I finished, if I moved into the health sciences, which naively at 19, I was like, I'll just do it, it's fine, whatever. So when I applied to the PhD in FE here, I was offered the mini master's route. And I was also offered a spot in the PhD of population health science at the University of Ottawa at the same time. And they wanted me to do like a 1-week intensive intro to FE course, because I had never heard the word epidemiology before. And then I spoke to Will Pickett, who at the time was the head for this department, and he said, well, I'm sure that, the University of Ottawa program is great, and I'm sure like this intensive week will be fantastic, but we'd really like you to do the mini master's route, which is a new offering, and essentially you do your first year is the master's in FE coursework. And then your second year is your PhD coursework. And I was like, oh, I already have a master's degree, I don't want to do another year. You know, I think for a lot of people, the PhD, 4-year PhD is a little bit harder to swallow than a 2-year master's degree. It's a big time commitment. I had already done 6 years of post-secondary at that point, so I didn't want to make it an additional 5 instead of 4. Also with the caveat that you had to successfully present a proposal that could then grow into a PhD program and have the department sign off on that, right? Anyways, at the end of the day, I did do the mini master's program, and thank God, because I think I would have cried just going right into advanced biostatistics thinking that that was totally normal and fine. I would have died. So mini master's program, and then so Heather was my supervisor, as you heard, and I'm laughing because I met with Heather and I said, this is all great and fine, and just so you know, I'm going to do this in 4 years. And she said, oh yeah, that's the usual length of PhD. And I said, no, like I'm going to do the whole thing in 4 years. Like I'm going to do the mini masters and the PhD. The PhD is going to be 3 years, and I'm out of here. And Heather said, okay, don't tell them that. But if you want to timeline it like that, if you think that you can do that, then we'll have that. And I did ultimately do that. And there was also, I believe, a point probably in like the last year where Heather said, oh, let's sit down and talk about, not on like Jen explained, sit down with your supervisor, talk about what your next step is, what your career goals are. I knew I wanted to go into academia. So Heather said, okay, let's talk postdoc. I said, oh, I'm not doing one. And she was like, what do you mean you're not doing one? I was like, well, I've already done 1,000 years of post-secondary. I don't want to do postdoc. I would like to simply be a professor. And she was like, oh, that's nice. And so sort of sat me down and explained how the world works. And then I did a 2-year postdoc. And also sort of as in line with what Kim said about, the world moving on around you, I was also, life happens, and I was also pregnant while I was defending my PhD. And Heather signed the papers to hire me as a postdoc, and 3 weeks later I told her I was pregnant. Sorry about that.
So on the postdoc angle, you don't go in and you think, I've done 1 billion years of school and I've paid $1 billion of tuition. How do you explain this, or how did you go about explaining that you needed to do a postdoc to your, significant others, your family members, whatever? How did you go about that? Because they were probably expecting, you're going to all of a sudden be a professor at Queen's making $100,000 plus, and then you're in this postdoc job, which is, a little bit above the poverty line for income, but not much. So how do you bring that conversation up?
It's a great question. My dad is actually a prof at Ottawa.
Okay.
But no, that's not a good thing because postdocs weren't a thing when he finished his PhD. A little bit of a different route because he his actually primary job was working for the federal government. He did his PhD while we were sort of small children and taught part-time, and still does actually, refuses to retire. But so for me, he always wanted what he first perceived to be like the very secure, the tenure track route. Like you'll do the PhD, we'll get the job, then you become assistant, associate, full professor, and then you'll have tenure for life. And my job here is done. I'm prepared to do effectively. So he didn't really know what a postdoc was. And to be honest, neither did I until I was sort of faced with that being my next logical step. So he was really honestly the hard sell. He thought, why won't they simply just hire you? So that's not how that works. My partner is much more understanding, but I've put him through many years of such things.
Jen, do you want to answer that question too?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think I still get that question. People are like, so postdoc, so more school. And I'm like, well, no, it's not more school. But they're like, so you're a professor. And you're like, well, no, not quite. But so people still very much see it as the same thing. But I think really it is different, right? You have such more flexibility with what you can do with your postdoc in terms of, you don't have this set, deadline of you have to finish these courses and this dissertation and these comprehensives in the back of your mind. And I think you can take it a number of ways, but for me, I really used it to be able to solidify, I guess, some of the new skills that I've learned and to really take the time to think about what I want my next period forward, I guess, to look like in terms of research. So, trying to really build that career path of thinking like, how can I set myself apart as a researcher, and where do I see my long-term goals going, especially in terms of things like what I started thinking about recently, like what would be your first grant that you would write? Like what collaborations would you have? What would set you apart, I guess?
So just building off of that, you talked about, the skills that you developed. So can you maybe, and I'm going to ask everybody this question, can you elaborate a little bit more on how your PhD training, and maybe particularly think about some of the aspects of our PhD program at Queen's that might be different than, say, the PhD program in epidemiology at the University of Toronto or somewhere else? How did that help you prepare you for your current role or any other roles that you've had post PhD at Queen's? Jen, we'll start with you.
So it definitely gives a good basis for epidemiology. So you get a really strong framework in most of the concept is epidemiology, everything from basic and intermediate, but also to advanced. And that really allows you to, at least for me personally, build off of it. It also, Queen's, in my opinion, at least comparatively talking to people in Europe, especially, is a very strong, I guess, comprehensive program that makes everyone come out with a very strong framework and understanding of epidemiology that I think is really a stepping stone that can be able, like I said, you can take it and do with whatever you want. So for me, that framework that I had really allowed me to build off of it and during the rest of my PhD, but also within my postdoc. So now I feel that, any type of new analysis or things like that is thrown at me, although there's still going to be learning that goes behind that, I have a great foundation to be able to work with.
Great. Kim?
Yeah, I would totally agree with all of those points that you just raised. And especially being over in the United Kingdom, the PhDs over here, as a lot of you may know, are 3-year PhDs. So to do a 4-year, and some of us may have taken a little longer than 4 years, to do a PhD where you're immersed in something for such a long period of time, it gives you a really good background and really good understanding. And the comprehensive exams, as you said, gives you a really good understanding. So in my PhD, just to sort of link it more specifically and not be quite so abstract, in my PhD, as you heard about, I was looking at quality of care for men undergoing radiotherapy for prostate cancer. I'm now doing child health research. So technically totally different, but not. Like, I have the toolkit of methods of epidemiological principles, and a lot of these things are the same. You can just apply them to different contexts. In my PhD, I was doing primary data collection, but I was immersed in a research group that was doing all secondary data collection. And the paper that I most recently published is actually a large administrative data set. So I was working with electronic healthcare records, 47 million electronic healthcare records from 4 million children. Has nothing to do with what I did in my PhD, but when someone said, hey, here's a really interesting project, we need someone to do this, I was like, yeah, absolutely, of course I can do that. So it's sort of the skills and the training that you're getting in your PhD give you the confidence to be able to do these types of things. And if you don't know the answer, you know where to look for the answer or where to get the answer. So I just think it's a really phenomenal training that, yeah, is serving me well, I'd say.
Yeah, so I definitely agree, with Kim and Jen. I think the Queen's has a very good foundation, and I would even say, like, especially with biostats. I'm not going to repeat everything, but like I said, I agree with everything. One thing that I would say is the TA opportunity. I jumped into teaching, TAing for A21, which is the intro to biostats. I feel like that really solidified my thinking about biostats, approach, and also epidemiology. And it helps you build whatever you want to build, afterwards. Like Kim was saying, I'm doing absolutely nothing to do with mental health, really. It's looking at, or if it is, it will be in the, medication and, pharmaceutical perspective, right? But the basics stand, no matter what you're doing. And I think Queens have given me such flexibility that I can sort of tailor, whatever things that I need. And even, it made me buy Rothman, and I still have the book, so I still need to read it if I needed some, really advanced answers.
Can you think of the teaching in particular, Brooke? Because that's probably the part of your job
Sure.
that's different from the others.
Yeah, I was gonna say, so I think you three are very focused in sort of the epidemiology world, and my work sort of gravitated more broadly to public health sciences in general. And a lot of what I do is education based. The one thing I wanted to say with respect to the postdoc is that, and I believe most postdoc positions are like this, there's a proportion, and Jen, like, let me know if yours is like this or not, and Ken as well. At least for mine, there was like a proportion of time, of work time that was supposed to be dedicated to the project that I was hired to support. But there was also a proportion set aside for time for me to do my own research. So I think it ended up being like I had 1 day a week worth of time where I was able to kind of explore my own stuff, write my own papers that were not sort of at the immediate direction of my supervisor. Is that sort of what's the same with you guys, Jen and Kim?
I would say probably not for me. I mean, I still find time to work on projects that I have that had existed for my PhD and that aren't related to my postdoc, but I think it really depends on, I guess, what your supervisors expects, I guess, within your postdoc and kind of what they see you doing. So like with probably many positions, it's just really flexible, I guess, in terms of what your supervisor needs or what the role needs.
Yeah, and I would say for me, I've been really lucky to be in a very supportive environment where as long as the research that I'm interested in relates to the overall goals of the unit, full steam ahead. So, you know, we kind of work collaboratively to, like, within our sort of multidisciplinary team to come up with the research idea and to build it together. So yeah, so I guess it's sort of a little bit like a PhD project in that way, but it's sort of bigger than that. Yeah.
That's great that you have that kind of flexibility. That's what I found sort of the natural progression for my sort of through the roles that I have had. So in the PhD, you have, you know, one project and you're married to that project and you better like it because it's going to be a good chunk of your life. And then you move into the postdoc, which is maybe an extension of the work that you did in your PhD and maybe a completely different project that an investigator got funding for a postdoc to support the project for. Where, at least in my experience, had, you know, a little bit of as leeway to continue working on my own things, and then moving into the research scientist role, which is sort of similar to like a research associate type position. Now it's my role is I think Heather used the word self-creating, make your own work kind of thing. So now I get to manage projects and hire my own research assistants and kind of think of my own ideas for where I want to take my previous work or where I want to kind of dive into new areas. So that's fun. With respect to the teaching piece, I mentioned that I primarily teach in the research methods, and that my sort of initial step into the teaching position, at least with DBMS, medical molecular sciences, came from Helena Boots, who is retired or nearly retired, has been trying to retire for a couple of years.
Unreduced low.
Yeah. And so this was a course that she and Will Pickett and Will King had developed in 2016, and Helene had been teaching it and was looking to reduce her teaching. I was originally actually hired as a teaching assistant, so you mentioned taking advantage of the TA opportunities. When I became a postdoc fellow, that position changed to a teaching fellow, which is basically a TA with a little bit more responsibility. And then Helene was sort of able to graciously decided that she didn't want to teach it anymore and hand it to me as an adjunct at that point. And now I've taught that course for 3 years. So the relationships that you make not only with your peers in your program, but also with, if your supervisor makes obviously a world of difference, and the other colleagues that you sort of pick up along the way in those collaborations are really important. It's through research projects that I worked on that were collaborative with multiple people, working with Heather, but also working with people who had appointments in the School of Rehab Therapy, which is how I ended up teaching in rehab. And then obviously PHS is sort of where I hail from, but those connections are almost as important, I would say, as that sort of toolkit of skills that you develop while you're doing it.
Great, so we had 2 people talk about the TA position. So just a plug for those job advertisements come out in when?
Soon.
For next year, they're gonna come out in the summer semester, not soon, but probably beginning of the summer, spring term. And we're getting more and more of those positions in the Department of Public. There used to be very, very few of them. We're getting more and more of them. Thanks to Brad for all of his hard work in securing those. So please do apply. Those do provide great opportunities, not only if you go into academia, but other fields of research and public health as well. All right, Paul, you're first up for this question. I know you've been waiting patiently. Okay, so what do you like most about your current job? What do you find most challenging, unexpected, and surprising?
Okay, so let's talk about what I.
So you're gonna take the rest of the time.
So it is an industry job, so it's very different from from us being in academia. I think I've been in school for, I had been in school for 32 years at the point where I left. It was a scary world. And I didn't know what to expect. So I'll start with what I like. So right now, I really like the diversity of work that I do. In one day, I might be working on writing a proposal for, let's say like a prostate cancer, related question. And then I will be writing a little bit of a manuscript, and then I will be auditing, SAS codes that other colleagues have written, just make sure that they work. I'll write my own codes. And then I'll end the day with working on graphs, for another, project that has nothing to do with what I started my day with. So I think it keeps things very interesting all the time. You always have to sort of look for different, more, extra information, and, you have to be on Wikipedia quite a lot. Just to get the basic idea, and then you go on PubMed and you expand your search. So things are very interesting. I do, and so that's what I like. What I find sort of neutral and sort of deciding about is the relationship with the clients that I have to deal with. Because now it's not the topics that are the only thing that are important, but I have to look, from the client's perspective as well. What question they come with. Do they make sense? How to make sure that they make sense? So if they don't make sense, what do I tell or what do I do, right? Having to deal with that, having to deal with demands and demanding clients, while at the same time respect yourself and respect your team, respect what can be done and what cannot be done. So I find that it's a bit challenging, when you're doing a PhD, you have almost like a single agenda, and it's that you graduate, and everybody agrees on that agenda. There's no doubt about it. So now I have to sort of balance all of that, in my everyday day-to-day life. What I think is very challenging is, again, this is a consulting, high-pressure industry job. There's a lot of focus on performance. You have to, sort of, deliver and not only do things up to the standard that they have, but also add to that. It's almost like an expectation. They want you to do things well. They want you to do things fast, and that these things sometimes they don't happen. Sometimes there's some really rush, and I'm not talking. And sometimes it'll be like for a single project, there's a rush to send out a poster that has to be submitted by end of day, and then you have to work on that, and it doesn't guarantee that it's going to end at 5 or 6 or 7 or midnight. You just have to do it because the deadline is there, or a whole season. At the end of the year, and sometimes it has nothing to do with you. The end of year, there's lots of invoices that have to be done, so they're going to ask for a lot of deliverables and products and stuff like that. And I hate using the word products for the things that we do, but that's what that's the term. So then right before Christmas, it's usually a very insanely busy season. So you have to dedicate your time to sort of do all of that. I think when it's done, it's done. So I guess those are things that I find that I like. Sort of neutral, still deciding and challenging. Yeah.
As a PhD student or grad student in general, I think it's very easy to fall into the flexibility trap, where you end up working all day, every day, into the night, over the weekend, and you have no idea where you are, what day it is. That was something that I always struggled with turning off, which I think is something that more than you're doing more school, you're doing another postdoc with my family, kind of found irritating, because I was just always on my laptop. It didn't matter where we were, what we were doing. I whipped it out.
because there was always something that you could be doing. And that's, I think, the biggest challenge with even my position that I still have. I enjoy the flexibility, I love it, and I don't think there's really another sort of outside of academia. I think it's difficult to find jobs that are as flexible as academia can be, but I think we really need to prioritize that work-life balance, and even, multiply tenfold then by the pandemic, where work also became home, and that line between where you work and where you do not work became even more blurred. To be honest, and not that I'm recommending this, but for me, what helped me finally draw the line between working time and not working time was having a child, because I just became a bigger thing in my life, and it just helped me to show that it is possible to prioritize, these blocks of time I am not going to work. The weekends are not time where I'm going to work. I'm going to spend time with my family, whether that's, for you guys, your friends or your family or whatever, your pets, like walk your dog, don't walk your dog in the middle of the night because you've been writing for 6 hours straight. But defining those sort of work-life balance lines, and even now having sort of come back after the pandemic where we are back in person, or able to be back in person, I still do work a sort of a hybrid model, so I work from home part-time and here part-time. The teaching actually helps me with that as well, because one of the offerings that I teach for 2 this semester are in class, so there are sort of fixed class times where I need to be here. That structure I find very helpful. Now that I've kind of crapped all over the flexibility part, that's also my favorite part. So I like that I can ride my horse in the middle of the day for a couple hours and come back and then keep working. I like that if I'm having a day where I don't have what I like to call a writing brain, I don't have to write that paper. That's not due at the end of the week, because I make my own deadlines within the confines of, what our clients and our partners are expecting from us. So it's more flexible in that sense. I do run into the same thing that you're describing, Paul, with sometimes when we partner with partners like Bella Soccer, Canada Life, and they say, oh, we want you to evaluate this thing, and we have 6 people that'll do it. Can you just evaluate it? Just like get data and then just like say it works and sign it, and then we'll say that you did that. And I'm like, what do you mean? So sometimes that's definitely still a challenge, even in this line of work. I don't think it's specific to industry. Every time you're analyzing something or evaluating something, creating something for somebody else, that sort of stakeholder analysis piece does have to come in.
I'm going to skip to a different question for our online participants, because we have one more question. I want to make sure we at least get a couple of answers for this before we open the floor up to the audience. So Jen, I'll ask you to answer first. What advice would you give to students from public health sciences as they figure out their own professional aspirations and direction? It's a really easy question.
So I was going to say, I think to really think about what you want, I guess. So, Brooke and Paul had given some good ideas of what, some benefits, but also some cons potentially of their job. But to think about really what is important to you at the end of the day, if it is after PhD, like flexibility, if you want to teach, things like that. And I think you can start thinking about that, during your graduate degree, no matter what time, to think about, what you want out of a career.
Great. Kim?
So, what advice would I give? That's a tricky question. I guess mainly I would say that it's going to be okay. Everything is going to be okay. Because I do really think that you're getting great training. Before I did my master's and PhD, I was a primary school teacher. And I decided that primary school teaching was not for me, and I wanted to switch careers, and that was okay. So I think you'll find sort of the path that works for you. And if you can do it in a very measured way and decide in advance what the best path forward is, that's ideal. But for me, it didn't work out that way. Life circumstances were taking us to London. I was happily going to London. I wasn't dragged kicking and screaming by any means, but I did need to sort of figure out how that path was going to work for me, and it's been fantastic. If I can just briefly answer the question before, in terms of what I love about my role, it's just so varied. I'm in a very active research research university, but also with links to policy, with links to Public Health England, which is now UK HSA, NHS England. I presented my work to a small research group. We're part of a grant, and I presented as part of this small research team. And the one fellow said, "Oh, well, actually, I'm on the NHS England board. Would you be able to come present this to the NHS England board next week?" Sure, I could do that. So, there's a lots of different things that you can do, and, lots of the skills that you have. And my skills as a primary school teacher have served me well in terms of presenting. So I think my advice is that, yes, do try and figure out the path if you can, but also just know that you've got great training, and that it will work out. You will be great.
Okay, I now want to open up the floor or online. If you want to put your question in the chat, that would be fine as well. To questions from the students first. Don't all jump up. Come on, why don't you come up and you can face the camera there so that everybody can see you and speak into the mic.
But I didn't have that in mind. Hi everyone, you're not supposed to see me, so I'm just gonna try and move over to the side. Thank you all for coming to today. I just want to go back in time a little bit and ask you guys when you were preparing to get into the PhD program, how were there any particular things that you prepared yourself with, or in terms of thinking about what project you were going to be doing or what you were going to be working on and how you were preparing yourself for that? So are there any tips that you can provide us?
Not a lot. I prepare for the GRE because I was applying as an international student, but I think when I was doing, so I think everybody will have very different ways of knowing if they wanted to do a PhD or not. For me, I had a background and I did a master's, and I felt like after master's, I got some of the skills, but I felt like it wasn't all the way. I still could not have sort of design and come up with my own research plan and stuff like that. So and I was really into it. So I thought that's why I knew I sort of wanted to do a PhD, thinking that it would sort of bring me closer to what I want to be able to design, be an independent researcher, at the time, or at least know what they're talking about, writing papers and stuff like that. So once I knew that that's what I wanted to do, that's sort of it. That's all I prepared. And then other things were more logistics, looking where I'm going to do, looked up many different names, many different universities, found Heather, and it's just cold email, whatever. Can you take me as a PhD student? And so that was basically it. That sort of triggered everything. And then, and then I got in, and I finished, thankfully, and then working not as an, still doing research, but not postdoc with the route that I mentioned. So I guess that was sort of how I prepared for a PhD.
I feel that I'm not sure if I'm the best one to answer this question because I was a disaster. I moved from social sciences to health science, as I said, accepted the program at Queen's, immediately realized I did not even know the definition of the word epidemiology, ordered a book off Amazon, just a random introductory textbook, read a couple chapters, cried a bunch, what am I doing with my life? Found Heather, also cold, called her, was 15 minutes late to our first meeting ever. Did the first 6 months of the program focusing on a project that Heather had in mind, and then came back to her office and said, I don't like this, I want to do something else. Very entirely different. And bless her soul, she said, okay, if you think that that's going to be what you want to do, then I'd rather you, do something that you want to do rather than toil through something that you don't want to do. So in the way of preparation, I think if I was to give you advice in terms of how to prepare, I would recommend considering that question, that what is it that you want to study? What is it that you're passionate about or you're mad about? What's going to take you through a 4-year intensive program of answering that question or a piece of that question, acknowledging that you're not going to come out the other end of it having solved the problem probably, unless you're very good.
Great, well, I think we're out of time. I think we're supposed to end at 120, and it's exactly 120. So if everybody could please join me in giving our panelists a round of applause. Kim and Jen, for taking some time out of your busy days and joining us online.